My dad's sick, so I came instead. What the little janitor boy did next left the CEO speechless. Excuse me, ma'am. My dad's sick today, so I came instead. The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Claire Hawthorne froze mid-sentence, the sentence on her tablet hanging unfinished in the air. Around the long glass conference table, department heads and legal advisors turned toward the source of the voice, every face wearing the same expression: confusion, then disbelief. Standing at the open doorway of the executive boardroom was a small boy, 6, maybe 7 years old. His oversized janitor uniform hung off his frame like a costume stolen from a laundry rack. The sleeves were rolled 4 times, his pant legs tied at the ankles with shoelaces. In one hand he held a battered spray bottle. In the other, a blue microfiber cloth folded neatly. His brown hair was mussed from the wind, and his sneakers, one red, one black, squeaked slightly as he took a step forward. "My name is Max," he added with practiced formality. "My dad is Jack Dalton. He cleans your offices every morning before anyone comes. But he's sick today. Fever, and his voice is gone. He said missing a shift might get him fired. So I came instead." Silence wrapped the room like frost. Claire blinked her mind, scanning for logic, for protocol, for any way this made sense. Was this a stunt? A prank, but one look at the boy's eyes, clear, earnest, unflinching, told her no. This wasn't a joke. The head of legal cleared his throat. "Claire, should I know?" Her voice was cool, precise. "Sit down." Max looked up at her from across the marble floor. "I brought my own cloth," he said gently, lifting the rag. "I know where to start. My dad always says to clean the CEO's desk first, 'cause the big stuff should shine the most." A chuckle escaped someone in the back. Claire shot a glance that froze it midair. "Max, is it?" she said, standing. Her heels clicked sharply as she approached the boy. "How did you get up here?" "I use the elevator," Max replied plainly. "I know the buttons. Sometimes I wait by the door when he finishes work. And the guard, Mr. Raoul, he knows me. He just said, 'Be good,' and I was." Claire crossed her arms, studying him. There was a strange calm in the boy's stance, not arrogance, not defiance, just a simple steadiness that felt unfamiliar in this room. "And your father?" "He knows you're here." Max hesitated. "He was sleeping when I left. I left a note. I didn't want him to get in trouble. I used my own quarters to ride the bus." "You took the city bus?" Claire echoed, incredulous. "Yes, ma'am. I wore this so people would think I belong." The head of HR leaned toward Claire. "We could have security." "We'll handle it," Claire said crisply, never taking her eyes off Max. She crouched to his level, something she hadn't done in years. "What made you think this was okay?" "Max?" His eyebrows pulled together. "Because?" "It was right. Daddy said, we take responsibility for our people. Even if it's hard. Even if no one claps." Claire inhaled sharply. Something about those words, simple, unpolished, pressed against the steel wall she'd built around her. She stood. "Follow me." The room buzzed as she led the boy past the table. Executives glanced at each other, unsure what protocol applied when a CEO was led out of her own boardroom by a child in janitor clothes. In the hallway, Claire stopped in front of her private office. Sleek, minimalist glass walls and sharp angles. Max looked up. "Is this your real desk?" "Yes." "Then I should start here." He stepped inside without waiting and surveyed the spotless surface. Claire watched him pull out his cloth spritz, a little cleaning spray into his palm, and begin wiping with careful circular motions. "This desk doesn't need cleaning," she said, folding her arms. Max didn't look up. That's what most people think. But fingerprints show up under the light. Claire glanced at the corner where sunlight caught faint smudges from this morning's coffee cup. She hadn't even noticed them. He kept wiping. "Why does your dad clean offices?" she asked, surprised at herself. "He says it's honest work," Max replied. "And it helps me get cereal and school shoes and lights and bedtime stories." Claire stood quietly. He looked up at her. "Do you read bedtime stories?" The question sliced through something brittle. "No," she said more sharply than she meant to. "I don't have children." Max tilted his head, considering. "That's okay. Not everyone's good at stories." Claire almost laughed, but the sound stuck in her throat. At that moment, her assistant buzzed through the intercom. "Ms. Hawthorne Media's on line 3. They're asking for a statement about this morning's breach." Claire pressed the button, "No statement," and "Cancel the rest of my morning meetings." A pause. "All of them." "Ma'am." "Yes." "All." She turned back to Max, who was now reaching across the desk to polish the other corner. His hand bumped her water glass. It tipped, crash. Water spilled racing across the sleek surface toward a stack of signed contracts. Max froze, horrified. I didn't mean to, please. Don't fire my dad. I was just trying to help." Claire moved faster than she had in months. She grabbed tissues, blocked the flow, saved the papers, then turned to him. Max stood there, eyes wide, lips trembling. "I messed it up. I was trying to be careful." Claire crouched again, placing a tissue in his hand. "You didn't mess anything up," she said softly. "You showed up. That's more than most adults do." He blinked at her. "You know what's funny?" she added. "I've negotiated $8 billion acquisitions without flinching. And yet, here I am, completely undone by a janitor's son with a spray bottle." Max gave her a small smile. "Daddy says cleaning helps people breathe better." Claire looked down at her spotless desk, then at the boy who'd come in his father's place. For the first time in a very long time, she exhaled. Claire Hawthorne had built her empire on 3 pillars: precision, performance, and control. Feelings were not on the list. They were liabilities, unquantifiable, erratic, weak. But that morning, as she sat across from a little boy in her office, a boy who had wiped her desk with shaking hands and spilled water in the process, something inside her shifted, cracked, then stayed wide open. Max now sat quietly on the bench near the floor-to-ceiling window, sipping a juice box from the executive fridge like it was no big deal. His legs didn't reach the floor, so they swung slightly with each sip. Claire, still seated at her desk, watched him, arms folded, but gaze strangely soft. "Does being a CEO mean you're the boss of everything?" he asked suddenly. Claire raised an eyebrow. "More or less." Max squinted thoughtfully. "Do you have to be mean to be the boss?" She tilted her head. "Where'd you hear that?" "My teacher said leaders have to be firm, and on TV all the bosses yell." He paused. "You didn't yell when I spilled your water." Claire's voice was calm, almost reflective. "Maybe that's because I've done worse." Max blinked. "Did you ever spill something big?" She smiled faintly. "Yes. Once I dropped an entire tray of champagne on a hedge fund partner at my first fundraising gala." "Did he fire you?" "No, but he never looked at me the same again." Max nodded, slowly absorbing that. "My dad says, people show their real heart when they have the power to hurt you and choose not to." Claire sat up straighter, the quote hitting somewhere too close. "Your father," she said slowly, "seems to have a lot of thoughts worth quoting." Max shrugged. "He reads books from the library. Sometimes we read them out loud while he cleans." He took another sip. "He says knowledge is for everybody, not just rich people." Claire exhaled through her nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. The boy was disarming in the way only truth could be. "Max," she asked, "what does your dad think about you coming here today?" "I left him a note," Max replied. "He'll be mad, but not angry mad, just worried mad. And your mom?" she asked, instantly regretting the question. Max looked down at his sneakers. "She died, giving birth to me." Silence settled like snowfall. Claire's fingers curled slightly. "I'm sorry." Max nodded solemnly. "Daddy says I was her last brave thing." That did it. Claire had been holding herself together with pure steel, but that one line hit her like a sucker punch to the chest. She turned toward the window, composing herself. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. "You said he tells you stories." Max nodded. "He tells the same one every night, about the day I was born. He says the world got a little quieter and a little brighter at the same time, like it didn't know what to feel." Claire stared out across the skyline. Her world had gone quiet once too on a rainy Tuesday in Boston 12 years ago, the day she signed the papers and walked out of the clinic. It wasn't that she hadn't wanted the child, it was that no one else did. Not her partner. Not the board that was about to hand her a $10 million fund. Not the world which gave her choices but punished her no matter which one she made. She remembered her mother's voice cold and firm over the phone. "You've worked too hard to throw it away for a maybe." That night, Claire had promised herself something. You don't cry for what you choose. And for 12 years, she hadn't. Not once. But today, a boy had walked in with a rag and a purpose, and he was unraveling everything she thought was nailed down. Her assistant's voice buzzed in her ear through the earpiece. "Media still waiting. There's speculation online about the child. Some think it's a publicity stunt. One tabloid's calling it the janitor's son who shook the tower." Claire didn't answer. She was still watching Max, who had now laid his empty juice box gently into her waste bin like it was a treasure. "Do you want me to go home now?" he asked politely. Claire hesitated. "Does your dad know which hospital he should go to?" Max's voice lowered. "We can't always afford it. Sometimes he just sleeps it off." Claire stood and walked to her desk drawer. She pulled out a card, scribbled something on the back, and handed it to him. "This is the name of a clinic near Midtown. They take walk-ins. Quiet clean. Tell them I sent you. They won't charge." Max looked at the card, then back up at her. "Why are you being nice?" Claire paused. "Because someone once told me that kindness isn't a strategy. It's a choice." Max grinned. "My dad would say that." She knelt down, looking him in the eye. "Your dad raised you well. You're brave, Max. You didn't just show up, you stood up." He tilted his head. "What does that mean?" "It means you did the right thing. Even when it wasn't easy. Even when it scared you." He didn't say anything, but the way he looked at her like she'd said something that mattered was the closest thing to thanks she needed. "Let me call you a ride," she said, rising. But Max shook his head. "I still got quarters. I'll take the bus." Claire handed him a 20 anyway. "Buy a sandwich, too." He hesitated, then took it carefully, folding it like it was sacred. Before he left, Max turned at the doorway. "Miss Claire. Yes, if my dad gets fired, can I come every Monday?" Claire smiled, something warm flickering in her chest. "We'll talk about that," she said. And as Max disappeared down the hallway, Claire Hawthorne, CEO, dealmaker, iron-willed architect of billion-dollar systems, sat back in her chair, heart suddenly heavier and lighter all at once. She didn't know it yet, but a door had opened in her life. Not one she walked through, one that walked in. The alarm on the nightstand buzzed uselessly, its weak trills swallowed by the wheeze of shallow breaths. Jack Dalton lay still on the narrow mattress, one arm draped across his eyes, his chest rising in uneven intervals. The room was dim lit only by the pale winter light slipping through the cracked blinds of the Bronx apartment. The space was quiet, too quiet. No pots clanking in the kitchen, no little voice humming from the corner of the room. Just the sound of an overworked radiator and Jack's ragged breathing. The note Max had left sat on the pillow beside him, written in careful block letters. "Dad, I'm going to clean your building so you don't lose your job. I took quarters and your blue spray. I promise to be respectful. Love, Max." Jack had read it 3 times before the fever pulled him back under. The last thought he remembered was reaching for his phone and finding it dead. Typical. No charger. No Max. Now hours later, guilt burned hotter than his fever. He groaned, sat up slowly, and swung his legs over the edge of the bed. The pain in his chest had moved in with a suitcase. His knees buckled when he stood. Still, he staggered to the kitchen, fingers gripping the counter until the world stopped spinning. A framed photo sat by the sink. A younger Jack, smiling. A woman with curly hair leaned into him, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. Her name was Sarah. Jack picked up the photo with trembling hands. "Max went to clean your building," he murmured. "Can you believe that, babe?" He smiled bitterly. "He's braver than me, and a damn sight more stubborn." He poured himself a glass of water and took a breath that hurt too much to finish. Jack Dalton hadn't always lived in this crumbling apartment. There was a time when his name had meant something in rooms with marble floors and glass walls. Jack Dalton, Algorithmic Lead Kintex Systems. He had written code that could identify nuclear anomalies before satellites could. At 27, he'd spoken at MIT, consulted for DARPA, and been offered a corner office in a building he couldn't afford to park in. But that was before. Before the AI he'd helped design made a fatal decision in a hospital ICU. Before a pregnant woman coded on a surgical table because an auto-allocation protocol flagged her vitals as non-priority. Before he realized it was his logic that helped write that line of code. The woman who died wasn't Sarah. But she could have been. And that was enough. Jack never went back to Kintec. Never touched code again. He took Max, still in diapers, and disappeared from the grid. Since then, he had cleaned floors. By noon, he had pulled himself together enough to take the subway to Midtown. The train jolted him into full consciousness, the rattle echoing against his skull. When he arrived at the base of the gleaming Australis Tower, he paused. The building rose like a blade into the sky glass steel power. Every step inside reminded him what he used to be, and everything he wasn't anymore. He checked in with the guard, Raoul, an old friend, and made his way to the staff level, nodding to familiar faces along the way. He didn't expect the whispering. 2 janitors paused as he passed. "That's him. The boy's dad. Heard the CEO cleared her whole schedule for the kid." Another whispered, "Kid went viral this morning." Like really viral. Jack didn't stop. He just kept walking. On the 27th floor, he pushed open the door to the janitor's supply closet. Everything was in place except the blue spray bottle. Max had taken it. He sat down on a crate, letting out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Then came the knock. He looked up. Claire Hawthorne stood in the doorway in black heels and a winter-gray trench coat that probably cost more than his last 3 months' rent combined. "Mr. Dalton." Her voice was even, but not cold. Jack stood surprised. "I heard you were back," she said. "Max left quite the impression." "I'm sorry," Jack said immediately. "He shouldn't have come. I would have stopped him." But Claire held up a hand. "He did something bold. Not reckless." Jack exhaled. "I wasn't planning on raising a hero." Claire stepped into the room, careful not to touch the mop bucket by the door. "Heroes don't always wear capes," she said. "Sometimes they wear uniforms 3 sizes too big and bring their own cloth." Jack allowed a tired smile. "He's a good kid. Too good sometimes. He said you read to him while you clean." Jack nodded. "We borrow audiobooks. Sometimes I recite passages he likes. It keeps him company while I work, and it reminds me I'm still teaching something." Claire studied him. "You were a teacher." "No," Jack said, leaning back slightly. "I was a systems engineer, defense and hospital tech. Left the industry after. Let's just say I got tired of building things that forgot people." Claire didn't respond immediately. Then, softly, "And now you clean the floors of the very buildings you used to help design." Jack shrugged. "Some people call that failure. I call it penance." She stepped closer. "I don't think Max sees you that way." Jack looked down at his hands stained from bleach and years of silent labor. "Kids believe in heroes until we show them otherwise." Claire's voice dipped. "Maybe. Or maybe they see something in us that we forgot to look for." For a moment, the air between them stilled. Something unspoken fragile floated in the quiet. Then Claire handed him a folded card. "This is for a clinic. Discreet. I already called. They'll see you this afternoon. On me." Jack looked at it, then at her. "I don't accept pity, Miss Hawthorne." She tilted her head. "It's not pity. It's what your son would do for you. If he had a bigger wallet." Jack hesitated, then pocketed the card. As Claire turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Mr. Dalton." "Yes." "You didn't just raise a good kid," she said. "You raised the kind of boy who walks into a tower of executives and teaches them what honor looks like. Don't ever apologize for that." And with that, she was gone. Jack stood alone, the door slowly shutting behind her, her words echoing louder than any corporate memo ever had. He looked down at his hands again. Maybe they weren't stained. Maybe they were just worn from holding on. And somewhere deep inside, a tiny flicker of something long buried stirred. Not pride, not yet, but hope. By Tuesday morning, Max Dalton had become a name people whispered in elevators and across break-room counters. He had no idea. While his photo mop in hand, standing proudly next to the Australis boardroom circulated across social media, he was sitting cross-legged in the reading corner of PS 128, piecing together words in a library book about stars. Meanwhile, inside Australis Tower, those whispers were growing louder. That janitor's son, he just walked into the CEO's meeting, Claire canceled her entire morning for him. When was the last time she did that for anyone? You see the video, the kid wiped her desk like it was the Oval Office. It had started with a blurry hallway video recorded by a junior associate named Elise. She hadn't meant for it to go viral, just thought it was too surreal to keep to herself. But the caption she typed changed everything. A 6-year-old showed more leadership than half this building. By lunch, news outlets were calling him the boy who cleaned the boardroom. By evening, the press was camped outside Australis, and Claire's inbox was filled with requests for interviews, think pieces, and morning show appearances. But Claire Hawthorne wasn't interested in spectacle. Not yet. She was still thinking about the boy's words. "Daddy says we take responsibility for our people even if no one claps." She stood at her window, arms crossed, watching the city shift below her. The same city that had taught her to keep her guard up her heels sharp and her emotions locked in a safe no one could pick. And yet, in the space of an hour, a child had walked through that armor like it was made of glass. Claire didn't do softness, she didn't do children, but she couldn't stop replaying Max's voice in her mind. Not rehearsed, not performative, just sincere. And sincere was something she hadn't encountered in years. Downstairs in the facilities department break room, Jack Dalton was on his second bottle of electrolyte water and his third round of quiet side-eyes. No one said anything directly to him, not yet, but they kept glancing. Not with malice, not even curiosity. Something else, something between wonder and guilt. Finally, it was Ray, the senior night janitor, who broke the silence. "You raised that boy to be something, Jack." Jack looked up from his sandwich. "He's 6. Ray smiled. So was Dr. King once. So was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Starts early. "I didn't raise him to walk into corporate boardrooms," Jack muttered. Ray leaned back. "No. You raised him to think he could." Later that day in the executive media suite, Claire met with her VP of Communications, a polished woman named Renee. "They want you on Good Morning America," Renee said, flipping through her iPad. "Today, show is also circling, and the Times wants an op-ed your angle on corporate compassion." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Because I didn't kick a child out of my office, because you're trending with a story that feels human," Renee said. "And frankly, your reputation could use the softening." Claire bristled. "I'm not interested in parading a janitor's son for PR optics." "Then don't," Renee said. "But he walked into that room. You responded like a person. The world saw it, and they liked it." Claire turned away, her gaze falling on the tissue box Max had used to clean her desk. She hadn't moved it since. "I didn't plan this," I know, Renee said gently. "That's why it worked." That evening, Claire took the service elevator down to the sublevels of floor she hadn't seen since the building opened 5 years ago. The lighting buzzed. The tile smelled like bleach and dust. She stopped in front of a gray door marked Facilities, Storage A. She didn't knock. She pushed. Inside, Jack was sorting supplies into plastic bins. He looked up surprised, but not startled. "I was wondering when you'd come down," he said, wiping his hands on his uniform. Claire raised an eyebrow. "You were?" Jack gestured at the empty mop bucket. "You seem like the type who doesn't let questions sit too long." She smirked. "And you seem like the type who answers them without being asked." He shrugged. "Saves time." Claire stepped closer, her heels soft on the industrial floor. Max didn't just create a moment. He started a narrative. And Astralis runs on perception as much as performance. Jack nodded slowly. "You're worried about how this plays." "I'm not worried," Claire corrected. "I'm calculating." Jack studied her. "That's the first honest thing I've heard from a suit in 10 years. Claire's expression didn't shift, but something in her chest flickered. "He walked into that room," she said quietly. "Alone. Knowing he could get kicked out, laughed at, ignored. But he didn't care. He thought about your job before his fear." Jack's voice softened. "He's like his mom that way." Claire hesitated. Then, "Tell me about her." Jack looked down at the gloves in his hands, then placed them gently on the shelf. Sarah was a symphony in a world full of static. She saw meaning in everything: dandelions and the sidewalk strangers' birthdays, the exact weight of someone's silence. "She made me believe we could raise a kid in a world that didn't always make room for good people." Claire swallowed. "And when she died, I stopped believing." Jack looked at her. "But Max, he never let me give up on the version of myself she saw. He holds me to that standard. Every damn day." Claire nodded slowly, as if absorbing something she hadn't expected to hear. "You're a man who builds integrity in the dark," she said, "and your son brings it into the light." Jack tilted his head. That sounded like a compliment. It was, she admitted. "Don't get used to it." They shared a small laugh, quiet but sincere. Claire stepped back. "I won't parade him in the press, but I'd like to find a way to honor what he did. Publicly. Gently." "You okay with that?" Jack thought for a moment, then said, "Just make sure whatever you do doesn't sell the story short." He didn't walk in for applause. He walked in for love. Claire nodded. "He's not the kind of story you use," she said softly. "He's the kind you follow." And as she walked away, Jack looked down at the rag Max had used, folded carefully and tucked into his pocket that morning. It still smelled like lemon spray. And something else. Hope. The morning sun filtered through the high glass walls of Claire's corner office, throwing sharp lines across her mahogany desk. Her schedule was packed: back-to-back strategy sessions, a board, pre-brief, and a Zoom call with European partners. But none of it felt urgent, not compared to the quiet curiosity pulling at her from somewhere beneath the surface. Her assistant had dropped off the personnel file late last night after Claire requested it reluctantly, almost apologetically. She had insisted it was for internal clarity, HR compliance. But now, alone in her office, Claire Hawthorne stared at the manila folder labeled Dalton Jack. She hesitated. This wasn't protocol. Not really. CEOs didn't sift through janitorial records. But Jack Dalton wasn't just a janitor. Not anymore. Claire opened the file. The first page was standard hire date, emergency contact, Max annual reviews, glowing all of them. The next was a skills form. One line caught her eye. Previous occupation systems engineer, Kintech Advanced Technologies. She frowned. She'd heard of Kintech. Everyone in defense and tech had. High-level military contracts, predictive modeling, artificial intelligence for federal use. Claire scrolled through the internal HR notes. No references provided. Quiet, private, overqualified. But never missed a shift. Staff adore him. Doesn't socialize. Another page, a faintly attached file, old resume. Out of date, sparse. But there it was, lead developer. Bioethics logic framework. Emergency AI Triage System. Her stomach turned. She knew that program. It had been flagged in a Senate hearing 6 years ago after a critical hospital incident. A woman coded in an ICU. The AI flagged her vitals as low priority and diverted resources elsewhere. The patient didn't make it. Claire leaned back slowly. Jack had helped build it, and then disappeared. By noon, she was still distracted. Words on memos blurred. Pie charts lost meaning. She walked into the executive lounge to get coffee, something she hadn't done herself in months. Inside, her chief of operations, Derek Marsh, was pouring espresso. "You okay?" he asked, noticing her silence. "I looked into Dalton," Claire said, voice low. Derek raised an eyebrow. "The janitor. He was a systems engineer at Kintec. He helped write emergency triage code for hospitals." Derek's brows rose. "You're serious?" Claire nodded. "He left the tech world completely. No lawsuits, no complaints, just vanished into blue coveralls and mops." Derek handed her a cup. "You think he's dangerous?" She shook her head. "No. I think he's the only person in this building who's actually seen what happens when power forgets people." Down in the lobby, Max skipped across the marble tiles after school holding a paper in his hand. "Miss Claire," he called as he neared the front desk. The security guard grinned and waved him through like a tiny VIP. Claire stepped out of the elevator just as he arrived. He beamed and held up the paper. "Look, I got a gold star in reading. I read a whole paragraph about planets without help." Claire took the sheet and smiled. "You know, I've had grown men show me 10 slide decks and they never looked this proud." Max puffed his chest. "My dad says stars matter more when you earn them." She crouched to his level, tapping the gold sticker. "Well, I'd say this one shines pretty bright." He glanced around the lobby. "Is Daddy working today?" Claire hesitated. "He's upstairs." "Yes. But he's not just cleaning." Max's face tilted. "What's he doing?" Claire smiled. "He's being remembered." Upstairs, Jack stood in front of a whiteboard in a glass conference room. Beside him were 2 IT staffers and a compliance officer. Claire had arranged a quiet consult off the record. No press, no announcements. Just a chance for him to speak, to share what went wrong back then, what the AI missed, what no code could catch. A woman on the compliance team asked carefully, "When did you stop trusting the machine?" Jack's eyes were steady. "The day I realized it was never meant to feel the urgency, only measure it. But medicine isn't a math problem. Neither is humanity." Another team member jotted notes, looking a little shaken. Jack continued. "We made something brilliant, but it lacked one line of code accountability. And we let it decide without conscience." The room was silent. Then someone asked what he'd do differently. Jack didn't hesitate. Build systems that put people second, and remind humans they're always first. Later, Claire stood outside the glass wall watching him. She saw something in him that had nothing to do with regret, something more profound. Not shame, but responsibility. The rare kind that didn't ask for applause. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant media's calling again. "They want to know the boy's name. Should we release it?" Claire stared at the screen, then typed back, "No. The story isn't his. It's ours." She slipped the phone away and walked into the room just as Jack was packing up. He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "Were you watching?" "I was listening," she corrected. "And learning." Jack nodded. "That's more than most CEOs ever admit." Claire stepped closer, folding her arms. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" He shrugged. "Because people only see what fits their expectations. And I didn't want pity. I wanted peace." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know, Jack, for someone who disappeared, you've left a bigger mark than most people who tried to be legends." Jack looked at her eyes, darker than usual. "I'm not a legend." "No," Claire agreed softly. "You're a mirror. You show us who we really are." He smiled faintly. "You sure that's something people want to see?" Claire smiled back. "No, but maybe it's what we need." And for the first time, standing across from the janitor who once helped build machines to save lives and now quietly cleaned the floors of forgotten offices, Claire Hawthorne didn't see a man who had fallen. She saw a man who had chosen to stand where the world stopped looking. And somehow that mattered more. Much more. It was almost midnight when Claire found herself in the corporate garage sitting behind the wheel of her Tesla with the engine off her hands, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the ground. She wasn't sure how long she'd been there. The city buzzed just beyond the concrete, its pulse muted through thick walls and tinted glass. She could go home. She should. But the silence inside the car felt safer than the silence inside her penthouse. Because tonight, Claire Hawthorne felt small. All day, Jack's words had followed her like a whisper she couldn't outrun. We let it decide without conscience, build systems that put people second, and remind humans they're always first. I wanted peace, not pity. In a world obsessed with disruption, he had chosen decency. And in a world addicted to being seen, he had chosen silence. But the part that hurt most, the part she hadn't said out loud in over a decade, was that Claire had once chosen silence too. Only hers hadn't been noble. It had been survival. She was 23. Freshly promoted, fiercely ambitious, one signature away from a 7-figure fund when she found herself staring at a pregnancy test in a restroom stall of a Manhattan office tower. 2 pink lines. She hadn't cried. Not then. She didn't have time. The next meeting was in 6 minutes. The father, a senior partner with a reputation for charm and no room for mistakes, ghosted her the moment she told him. Her mother predictably said only fix it, and never speak of it again. Claire booked the appointment herself, took a car, signed the papers, walked home, and never cried. But every year after that, on the same Tuesday in March, she found herself looking a little longer at children on park benches, wondering, doing the math. Would they be walking yet? Talking, laughing. She told herself it was the right choice, and maybe it was. But it left a wound no amount of power could cover. And now, here she was, 13 years later, undone by a little boy with mismatched sneakers who had asked her with all the sincerity in the world, "Do you read bedtime stories?" Claire rested her forehead against the steering wheel, exhaled, and whispered to no one, "No, sweetheart. I never got the chance." The next morning, she walked into the office early. Earlier than usual. She needed silence before the noise began. She didn't expect to find Jack already there. He was in the executive hallway kneeling beside a plant stand, polishing the brass fixtures like it mattered. "Don't you ever sleep?" she asked, surprised. Jack glanced up. "Sleep's for people who don't owe the universe back taxes." Claire smirked. "And how's your ledger looking these days?" He leaned back on his heels, still in the red. "But I'm working on it." She watched him a moment longer. "Why are you really here this early?" He stood, wiped his hands on a cloth, and shrugged. "Sometimes it's easier to breathe when no one's watching." Claire stepped closer, her voice gentler. "Do you miss it?" "The tech world?" She nodded. Jack was quiet for a beat. "Then I missed the feeling that I was building something that could matter. Before I realized it already had, and that it mattered the wrong way." Claire nodded slowly. "You know, I built an empire so I'd never feel powerless again. But most nights I come home and feel like a fraud." Jack looked at her unblinking. "That's how you know you're still human." She laughed under her breath. "You always talk like you've seen the edge of something." "I have," he said, "and it looked a lot like me. Alone. Scrubbing floors while hoping my kid didn't outgrow the shoes I couldn't afford to replace." Claire's throat tightened. "I was alone once, too," she said quietly. "But I made a different trade. I gave up someone who hadn't even arrived yet for a future I wasn't even sure I wanted." Jack didn't speak. He just stood there, his silence offering something stronger than judgment space. Claire's voice cracked slightly. I never told anyone that. You just did. She swallowed. Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if you'd stayed in the system? Jack shook his head. Not anymore, because now I know that sometimes stepping out of the system is how you remember your soul. She let that sit. Then Max sees you that way, you know. What way? Not as a janitor. Not even as a father. He sees you as a lighthouse. Jack blinked. That's a nice metaphor. Claire's lips curved faintly. It's not a metaphor. That kid, he walks like he has a compass in his chest. You gave him that. He looked away, clearly fighting emotion. Do you think she asked softly people like us? Get a second story. Jack met her gaze, something warm, flickering behind the weariness. I think the world gives second chances all the time, he said. It's just, we're usually too proud to take them. Claire looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe it's time we did. That afternoon, Max returned with another drawing. A messy crayon sketch of a tall building and a stick figure man holding a mop beside a smaller stick figure boy with a big smile. At the top, in orange letters, My dad is a hero because he shows up. Claire taped it to her office wall above the framed time cover above the signed deal with Tokyo Tech above the designer art. And when people walked in and asked what it was, she'd simply say, perspective, because sometimes the most important stories are the ones written in crayon. And sometimes the real power isn't in changing the world, it's in showing up for the part of it that no one else sees. It started as a murmur, barely a ripple in the polished surface of Astralis Tower. Have you heard about the janitor? You mean the one with the kid who came in last week? Yeah, word is the CEO's been spending time with him. Most rumors came and went like morning fog. But in Claire Hawthorne's world, even fog could sink a ship if you let it linger. By the end of the week, it wasn't just gossip in the elevators, it was spreading through inboxes, whispered in partner lounges, and surfacing in investor forums. And then came the article. A small tech blog with too much time and too little integrity posted a headline designed to provoke billion-dollar CEO and the Janitor A story of power, proximity, and perks. The content was flimsy speculation at best, but the damage was instant. The article was picked up by 2 larger outlets within hours. No names were confirmed, but the photo, embedded a cropped security shot of Claire walking beside Jack near the maintenance corridor, said more than the text ever could. Claire slammed the file shut and dropped it on her desk. Renee, her VP of Communications, stood stiffly across from her phone in hand. We can spin it, Renee said carefully. Say it was an internal leadership coaching initiative highlighting the company's human-first rebranding. Frame Jack as an anonymous employee who inspired a culture shift. Claire looked up sharply. He's not a prop, Renee, and I won't paint him as one. Renee hesitated. Then we need to make a choice. This company's reputation has a valuation, and it's slipping. Claire's jaw clenched. She stood, walked to the window, and stared out over the Manhattan skyline. I never cared about reputation, she murmured. I cared about respect. There's a difference. Not in headlines, Renee replied quietly. Downstairs, Jack was already feeling it. People didn't look at him the same. Some smiled a little too hard. Others avoided eye contact altogether. But everyone seemed to know. He heard it in the change of tone. In the way a manager joked, Guess we should all befriend the CEO, huh? In the way someone had wiped his name off the janitor's board and replaced it with Mr. VIP. Jack didn't respond. He just kept mopping. But inside, he was boiling. That night, when Max fell asleep after reading Charlotte's Web, Jack sat on the edge of the bed, the glow of the nightlight painting quiet shadows on the wall. He looked down at his son, the kid who had stepped into a skyscraper with nothing but a rag and a sense of duty, and he whispered, You did the right thing, Max. But maybe the world wasn't ready for it. The next morning, Claire walked into the boardroom to find it already half full. Men in suits, women with tablets charts on screens, sterile and sharp like scalpels. Gregory Monroe, the chairman of the board, stood as she entered. Claire, he said, measured, we've convened a closed executive session in light of recent media narratives. Claire sat without flinching. You mean the rumors? One of the senior partners cleared his throat. Perception is reality in our world. Another added, the market doesn't care about good intentions. It cares about optics. Monroe leaned forward. There's talk, Claire, about your objectivity, your proximity to a non-executive employee, a man with no clearance, no formal influence, yet somehow with access to you. Claire's voice was calm but icy. Are we discussing professionalism or proximity to someone who doesn't wear a suit? Silence. Monroe inhaled. Claire, you've built something remarkable here, but leadership requires distance, detachment. The minute our investors believe the company is vulnerable to emotional interference. You mean human interference? She interrupted, her voice sharp. Monroe kept going. We lose confidence, and if confidence slips, so does our stock. Claire leaned forward, eyes steady. And what do you suggest I do to appease their confidence? Apologize for treating someone with dignity. One of the women at the table shifted. Step back, disengage, quietly distance yourself from Mr. Dalton. Let it fade. Claire looked around the room, faces she'd known for years, people she'd built empires with. Not one of them met her eyes. Then she stood. Her voice was quiet, but every syllable landed like a hammer. Let me be perfectly clear. If Jack Dalton is being targeted, diminished, or disrespected because of his job title or his proximity to me, then I will be the first to leave this company. Immediately. Murmurs erupted. Claire continued, louder now. He is not a threat. He is not a liability. He is a man who shows up, without fanfare, without ego, and if that unnerves you more than the executives who bury failures in polished decks, then maybe the problem isn't him, it's you. She let that land, and one more thing she added. He didn't ask for any of this. I'm the one who cleared my calendar for a little boy with more courage than most CEOs I've met, and I'd do it again. Monroe's face flushed. Claire, you're putting everything at risk. No, she said. I'm putting something back in place. It's called integrity. Maybe you've heard of it. And with that, she turned and walked out. Back on the lower floors, Jack was packing his cart when Claire entered the janitor's closet. I was just finishing, he said without looking up. I know, she replied. I'm not here for work. He turned, saw the look in her eyes. You heard. I answered. She corrected. Jack wiped his hands on his cloth. I didn't want to be the reason you lost anything. She stepped closer. Jack, you're not the reason. You're the reminder. Of what she met his gaze. That there's still room in this world for people who don't measure their worth in titles. He exhaled. You stood up for me. You stood up first, she said softly. The day you taught your son to carry honor like a second skin. They stood in silence for a beat. Then Jack spoke, voice low. So, what now? Claire smiled faintly. Now we let the rumors burn out on their own. And if they don't, then we build something louder. And just outside the closet, a cleaning staff intern paused in the hallway, overhearing only part of the conversation, just enough to smile. Because it wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a story. And stories, when true, have a way of carrying themselves. The letter came in a plain white envelope wedged between overdue bills and Max's school flyer about an upcoming science fair. Jack opened it with one hand while stirring soup on the stove with the other. He didn't expect anything, certainly not legal papers. But there it was. Petition for establishment of paternal rights. Daniel Carter versus Jack Dalton. Jack stared at the name, the ink suddenly heavier than paper. He read it again. Daniel Carter. He hadn't heard that name in almost 7 years. Didn't need to. Didn't want to. But the past has a way of circling back, especially when it smells opportunity. Claire was in her office when Jack arrived. He didn't knock, just stood in the doorway, letter in hand, jaw tight. She looked up from her screen. One glance at his face, and she knew. "Tell me," she said. Jack handed her the envelope. She scanned the document quickly, her expression unreadable. "Daniel Carter," she murmured. "Who is he?" Jack ran a hand over his face. Max's biological grandfather. Sarah's father. Claire looked up, surprised. "I thought he cut us off the day Max was born," Jack said. "Told Sarah she was throwing her life away by keeping the baby. Said I was beneath them. After she died, he never called, never showed up, never sent so much as a birthday card." Claire's jaw tightened. "And now he wants rights." Jack nodded. He saw the press, saw the rumors, probably smelled money, or leverage. "Does Max even know him?" Jack shook his head. "He doesn't know the man exists. And I never planned to change that." Claire folded the paper slowly. "Then we'll fight this." Jack looked at her. Claire stepped out from behind her desk. "You're not doing this alone." The courtroom smelled like dust and formality. Jack sat beside a sharp-eyed woman named Angela Vaughn, one of the top family law attorneys in the state. Claire had hired her without hesitation. Angela specialized in two things: protecting single parents and demolishing opportunistic lawsuits. Across the aisle sat Daniel Carter, well-groomed, designer coat, a too-practiced smirk. He didn't look at Jack, just adjusted his cufflinks like he was preparing for a photo op. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The trial began. Carter's attorney went first. He painted a picture of concern. Mr. Carter was simply unaware of his grandson's situation. The boy's mother passed tragically, and his father, while well-meaning, is a janitor living in modest circumstances. Jack felt the insult slide across the courtroom like grease. Claire, sitting in the back row, didn't move, but her eyes narrowed razor-sharp. Then Angela rose. She spoke with calm precision, her voice a scalpel. "Your Honor." Mr. Carter had full knowledge of the pregnancy. He advised termination. When his daughter refused, he abandoned her. "My client, Mr. Dalton, has raised Max entirely on his own. No support, no visits, no contact. What Mr. Carter is seeking now is not connection, it's control." She turned to Jack. "Mr. Dalton, can you describe your relationship with your son?" Jack leaned forward. "I'm not perfect, but Max knows he's safe. Every night we read stories. Every morning I pack his lunch. He's never gone a day without knowing he's loved." Angela nodded. "And what does Max call you?" Jack's voice broke slightly. "He calls me Dad. He calls me home." Later, Daniel took the stand. He smiled as he spoke like he was auditioning. "I just want to be part of my grandson's life," he said. "He deserves a chance at a better future, with resources, stability, a name." Angela stood arms crossed. "Mr. Carter, are you saying the man who's raised him for 6 years isn't enough?" Daniel shifted. "I'm saying the boy could do better." "Better," Angela repeated. Or Richard Daniel didn't answer. Angela walked to the bench. "Your Honor, parenting is not about status. It's about sacrifice. And no man has sacrificed more than Jack Dalton." The judge took 2 days to issue the ruling. Jack didn't sleep, either of them. When the court reconvened, the judge's voice was steady, solemn. After reviewing the case, the court finds no grounds to alter the current custodial structure. Mr. Dalton is and remains the sole legal guardian of Maxwell Dalton. Petition denied. Case closed. Jack's breath left him in one sharp, silent rush. Angela placed a hand on his shoulder. Claire from the back row stood slowly, her eyes glassy but proud. Daniel Carter left without a word. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a man who came for a legacy and walked away empty. Outside the courthouse, Claire caught up to Jack. "You did it," she said. Jack shook his head. "We did." He looked down the steps where Max was holding Angela's hand, swinging it, slightly oblivious to how close he'd come to being torn away. Claire followed Jack's gaze. He doesn't know. Jack shook his head. He knows we went to court. He doesn't know why. Claire considered that. Will you tell him one day? Jack nodded. When he's old enough to understand that family is the people who fight for you, not the ones who show up when it's convenient. Claire's voice softened. You're the kind of man I never knew I needed to meet. Jack looked at her surprised. You stood by me, he said. Most people would have walked away. She met his eyes. Most people haven't been waiting to be seen their whole life. They stood there in the late afternoon sun on courthouse steps that had seen too many broken families. But that day, something had been restored. Not justice, not victory. Dignity, the kind that can't be handed down, only earned and held tightly, like a child's hand in a father's grip, forever. There are rooms where decisions shape empires. Then there are rooms where hearts are measured. Claire Hawthorne stood in one of the former glass walls' 10-foot ceiling stock graphs projected onto sleek OLED screens. But what she was about to do came from the latter. The boardroom was full, every seat taken, suits polished, ties straightened, eyes sharp. No one sipped coffee. No one smiled. They were all here for one thing: to vote on whether Claire remained CEO of Astralis. The whispers hadn't died down after the courtroom win. If anything, they had evolved more pointed, more insidious. She's compromised, too involved, brilliant but emotionally unstable. Falling for a janitor. Really, Claire sat at the head of the table, calm but electric. Her presence didn't demand the room. It commanded it. Gregory Monroe, ever the diplomat, stood first. This isn't personal. He began as all things that were deeply personal always did. It's about stability. The media firestorm. The narrative surrounding Claire's relationship with an employee. Investors are nervous. We must respond. He gestured to the tablet in front of each board member. This vote is confidential, but the outcome, whatever it is, will define our future. Claire didn't flinch. He looked at her. Would you like to speak before we proceed? She stood slowly. Every eye shifted to her. I spent 12 years turning this company into a fortress, Claire said. I've secured billion-dollar contracts, outmaneuvered competitors twice our size, and led us through a pandemic without a single layoff. But that's not what they're questioning, is it silence? What they're really asking is whether I can still lead after being human, after opening the door to a janitor, after being moved by a 6-year-old boy who walked into this tower with nothing but a rag and the courage to stand in for his sick father. She paused, scanning the room. They want to know if I've changed. She let that sit. I have. Another silence. This one heavier. I've changed because I remembered something. Something we forget when we chase numbers over names, when we build walls higher than our values. I remembered that real leadership doesn't fear humility, it requires it. She stepped away from the table. If that makes me unfit to lead, then vote me out. But just know, if the measure of success is who sits at your table, then this company is poorer for every janitor assistant and delivery worker we failed to see. No one spoke. Claire sat back down. Monroe cleared his throat. Begin the vote. One by one, fingers tapped screens. Claire folded her hands. Whatever happened now, she was at peace. 2 floors down, Jack was wiping down a stainless steel elevator panel when a voice startled him. Mr. Dalton. He turned. A young man in a perfectly tailored suit stood awkwardly in the hallway holding a tablet. Sorry to interrupt, the man said, but they're voting. Jack raised an eyebrow. Voting. The man glanced around. Whether to keep Claire on as CEO. Jack's jaw tightened. I know it's none of my business, the man added, but she's the only executive who's ever looked me in the eye. I used to be invisible. Not anymore. Jack nodded slowly. That's Claire. Some of us, the man added, don't want her to fight alone. Back in the boardroom, the results flashed on screen. Claire looked up. 7-5. She had won, barely, but decisively. Monroe closed his tablet, his expression unreadable. The board has made its decision. Claire, you'll remain CEO. There was a pause, a collective exhale, a ripple of surprise. Some smiled in relief, others in resignation. Claire didn't react. She didn't need to, because then the doors opened, and something happened that no one in that room could have anticipated. A small procession entered staff members from across the building, custodians, receptionists, mailroom workers. Wearing uniforms and nervous smiles, they stood quietly along the wall. Leading them was Jack. Max, holding his hand, stood beside him in a tiny button-down shirt that didn't quite fit. The room froze. Claire blinked. What is this? Jack didn't speak right away. He looked at the people in the room, at the suits, the power. Then he looked at Max, who nodded as if to say, "It's okay, Dad. You're allowed to be brave, too." Jack stepped forward. "I didn't come here to speak," he said, but Max insisted. Max held up a sheet of paper. Claire read it from her seat. "A company isn't great because it makes money. It's great when it makes people matter." Jack added, "He wrote it after the trial. Said he wanted to hang it in every hallway." Someone in the back chuckled softly. Another wiped a tear. Jack looked directly at Monroe. "I didn't ask to be part of your world, but I won't apologize for reminding you it's not just your world." He turned to Claire. "And I'll never apologize for respecting someone who chooses courage over comfort." Claire didn't say a word, but her eyes said everything. "Thank you." Jack gave a nod, took Max's hand, and left as quietly as he came. But the room didn't recover right away, because something had changed. The vote had confirmed her title, but that moment crowned her with something far rarer in corporate America. Respect, the kind you can't buy, can't bully, can't fake. And from that day forward, everyone in that room, whether they admitted it or not, knew one thing for certain. Claire Hawthorne didn't just run a company. She led it, with spine, with heart, and with the quiet world-shifting truth that dignity is not a cost. It's the foundation. 3 months had passed since the board vote. The building still looked the same. Polished floors, mirrored elevators, high-gloss conference tables, but something had changed inside Australis Tower. A shift not in branding, but in breadth. Departments once siloed now spoke to one another. Executives said good morning to janitors. Interns sat in on brainstorms. Someone even replaced the executive-only sign on the top-floor coffee bar with a new placard that simply read, "Welcome in." But the biggest change of all was happening in an old mailroom no one had touched in years. Claire stood beside Jack, surveying the half-painted walls, rows of unused desks, and a flickering overhead bulb. "It's not exactly the sleek startup look," she said, brushing dust off a folding chair. Jack grinned. "That's because it's not a startup. It's a rebuild." Claire turned toward him. "You're really ready to do this?" He nodded. "You said you wanted to create something for the people who keep the machine running." "I did." "Then let's do it without the machine this time." Claire smiled. "What do we call it?" Jack paused, then pulled a sticky note from his back pocket, slightly wrinkled with Max's handwriting. Clearline, it read in crooked blue ink. Below it, the tagline Max had added, "Because clean means honest." Claire read it, lips curving. "He really is your son." Jack smirked. "And yours now, apparently." She didn't flinch, but something in her chest skipped. Clearline was built without fanfare. No press releases, no ribbon cuttings, no TED Talks or flashy promo videos. Just a team, a few desks, and a mission build systems that remember the people who use them. Jack's vision was simple: create digital tools designed by people who actually did the work. Not managers, not theorists, but maintenance workers, security guards, assistants, nurses, line cooks, people who knew what it was like to be last in line and first forgotten. One Friday morning, Claire walked in early to find Jack sketching a wireframe on the whiteboard. He was in his usual work shirt, sleeves rolled, brow furrowed. "You always look like you're solving national security," she teased. "I used to," Jack replied without looking up. "This is harder." Claire sat down, crossing her legs. "We've got 5 companies asking for pilot demos already." Jack nodded. "I know, but I want the interface to be clean. Uncluttered. Something even my dad could have understood after a double shift on his feet." Claire studied him for a moment. "You could have said yes to any venture firm. Gotten your own floor in Silicon Valley." Jack looked at her. "I didn't want to build something that works. I wanted to build something that matters." Claire's voice softened. "You really believe that's still possible?" He met her eyes. "I don't believe in empires anymore, but I believe in repair." That afternoon, Max came by after school. He ran down the hallway with a crayon drawing in one hand and a juice box in the other. "I finished the new logo," he announced, holding up his masterpiece, a straight blue line under a smiling face with the words "Clear Line" in bubble letters. Claire crouched beside him. "That's amazing." Jack took the paper gently. "You know most CEOs pay millions for branding like this." Max shrugged. "I just drew what it felt like." "What it felt like?" Claire asked. Max nodded. "You know, like when you walk into a room and no one is trying to be better than anybody. It's just clear." Claire blinked. "That might be the best pitch I've ever heard," she whispered. Weeks later, the prototype launched. A simple app, a digital checklist that auto-translated between departments. Maintenance alerts that included building-wide visibility. Time-off requests routed directly to team leads without red tape. Most of all, a feature called Human Trace, an anonymous feedback loop where staff could flag when they felt overlooked. It was elegant, quiet, brilliant. Within a month, 2 Fortune 100 companies adopted the beta. But it wasn't the user stats that moved Claire. It was the janitor from a Chicago office who emailed customer support and wrote, "This is the first time I felt like the system spoke with me, not at me." She forwarded it to Jack with a single line, "You didn't build software. You built dignity." One night after the last meeting ended and Max had fallen asleep on the beanbag chair beside the printer, Claire and Jack sat in silence at the back of the office. The lights were low. The coffee pot gurgled faintly. Claire turned to him. "You ever think about how unlikely this all was?" Jack tilted his head. "You mean us?" "No," she said with a half smile. "I mean the janitor's closet becoming the launch pad for a company." He chuckled. "Same difference." There was a long pause. Then she added quietly, "You once said you stopped believing in systems." "Why trust this one?" Jack's voice was calm. "Because this time, we're not building from above. We're building from the ground." She nodded slowly, then looked at him with something deeper than admiration recognition. "We still don't have titles," she said softly. Jack leaned back in his chair. "I don't need one." She looked at him. "What do you need then?" He glanced toward Max sleeping soundly with a slight smile on his face, then turned to her. "A reason to keep showing up. And someone to show up for." Claire didn't answer, but in that quiet, unfinished sentence, something between them became whole. Clearline didn't make the front page of TechCrunch. It didn't trend on Twitter. It didn't IPO in the first year. But it did something else. It made people feel seen. And in a world built on glass towers and silent corridors, that was enough. 6 months later. The door opened quietly. Jack stepped inside holding Max's lunchbox in one hand and a simple gray messenger bag in the other. His shirt was still buttoned slightly off-center, and the old scuff on his left shoe remained, though now it seemed like a badge of honor more than an oversight. The room was unlike any other in the building. There were no plaques, no marble floors, no desks arranged by status. Just a long wooden table surrounded by people designers, coders, janitors, receptionists, and senior advisors all leaning forward, laughing, sketching ideas, debating ethics like philosophers. There were no suits, no uniforms, just purpose. A small gold plate on the glass door read Gabriel Cole, Strategic Culture Liaison, Marchand Global X Clearline. Jack smiled at the plate for a moment. His real name. First time he'd seen it etched into anything permanent in years. Inside, Max was curled up in the corner with a workbook scribbling French vocabulary beside Lucy, the daughter of a former warehouse foreman. They were both laughing trading stickers. Claire glanced up from the head of the table and caught Jack's eye. She wore no blazer today, no heels, just a cardigan and jeans with a pen behind her ear and paint smudged on one wrist from helping the kids earlier. She stood and walked over to him. "You're late," she teased. Jack grinned. The vending machine unionized. She raised an eyebrow. "Well," Max wanted to leave a thank you note for the maintenance guy, Jack admitted. He said, and I quote, "No one ever thanks the soda machine man, and he's part of the system, too." Claire chuckled. "Can we just admit now that your son runs this company?" Jack leaned in slightly. "Honestly, it's working out better than most of the adults I've worked under." They stood in that gentle, familiar quiet, the kind that no longer carried tension, only tenderness. Something had grown between them, not rushed, not forced, but layered and real. She looked at him. "You ever regret it? Saying yes to all this?" Jack glanced around the room. At Max, now patiently helping Lucy pronounce bonjour correctly. At the brainstorming team where a janitor was drawing a feedback model on the whiteboard while a former VP took notes. "No," he said softly. "Because for the first time I'm not fixing someone else's mess. I'm helping build something clean from the start." Claire nodded. "It's still messy, though." "Sure," he said. "But it's our mess." She tilted her head. That almost sounded romantic. Jack chuckled. "I'm trying. I only practiced for 20 years. They stood there not needing to say more. Then gently, Claire reached out and touched his hand. "I know we didn't plan. Whatever this is." Jack looked down at their hands, then up into her eyes. "I think we earned it anyway." Later that evening, the three of them sat around the kitchen table in Claire's apartment. Max was showing off his French phrases. Claire was attempting to bake cookies from scratch and burning them gloriously. Jack was sipping tea, watching the scene like someone who still half expected it to vanish. The walls had children's drawings taped beside framed art. A vase of sunflowers stood stubbornly proud on the windowsill. Jazz played low from a Bluetooth speaker that Max had declared too old to be cool. Claire set down the tray of slightly blackened cookies with mock ceremony. "May I present creme brulee discs of disappointment?" Jack took one. "Tastes like childhood." Max bit into his with gusto. "Tastes like fire." They all laughed. And in that moment, just three people sharing slightly overcooked cookies in an apartment that smelled like vanilla. And joy, the world felt right. Not perfect, but good. Claire leaned her elbows on the table. "Do you remember what you said the first day we met?" Jack furrowed his brow. Something about paper towels and broken soap dispensers. She shook her head. "You said, 'I'm just here to clean.'" Jack smiled. Claire reached across and squeezed his hand. "Well," she said, "I'm glad you stayed." Outside the window, the city blinked in amber light, still rushing, still loud. But in that room, time slowed. No resumes, no job titles, no networks or algorithms or boards of directors, just three people. A table, and something better than an empire. A family. Claire raised her mug. "To the rooms that don't care where you started." Jack tapped his cup to hers. "Only where you choose to show up next." And Max, in his small but certain voice, lifted his juice box and declared, "To the cleanest name I know, Dad's." And in the warm hush that followed, there was no applause, no press, no headlines, just a quiet truth. Sometimes the ones who were asked to mop the floor are the very ones who end up cleaning the name of the place itself. And when that happens, love walks in. Dignity stays. And the story finally feels whole. Sometimes all it takes is one small act of kindness, one moment of being seen, to change not just a life, but an entire legacy. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We read everyone. And if stories like this give you hope, make you believe again in love, dignity, and second chances, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspirational journeys just like this. There's so much more to come. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Your presence means the world. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop believing in the power of a good story.